welcome to Radar Cop Podcast. This is episode 302, Wellness with M&amp, titled Patient Advocate. I'm your host, Al Martinez, also known as Alpha Mike. Today we're going to dive into the workings of critical care in a hospital, and we're going to look at, to make it easier for people, how to navigate through that process. Most of what we'll be talking about, and especially I'll be talking about, is from recent personal experience, and we know that it will definitely help you, and God forbid that you have to go through this type of process. But nevertheless, we'll get that in a few. If you are looking for self-protection training in the Tampa Bay area, you can give us a call at radarcoptac.com and look us up on the website at radarcoptac.com. Whether it's shotgun, pistol, revolver, whatever evolution you want to know about, we can help you out. So give us a call. And also, if you want to hear more of our podcast, you can go to radarcop.com. That's radarcop.com. You can hear episode number 1 to episode 302, this one. So that's 302 episodes. All you have to do is look us up wherever you get your podcast and type in Radar Cop Podcast, and 302 episodes will pop up. So as we move along, we're going to talk a little bit in our intro today of why we're here. Now, recently I had a sibling that ended up in the hospital, and it has been a roller coaster ride of about 3 weeks as of this podcast. A lot of things. First of all, I never expected to be in this role as this family member of mine as your advocate, but I am, and it comes with stress and responsibility. I went through the same thing with my own father in 2020. He passed away in that era, and I was his advocate. I made decisions on his health, and that was difficult because I did it by myself. In this current case, there's a team of us that are doing it. I'm taking the lead because my family member designated me as that person, but there are 3 of us on the team, and we'll explain more about that. On other news, we've learned that over 60% of the U.S. population want change in the White House. Who knew that? Who could have figured that 60% of Americans are itching for change in the White House? Maybe it's due to inflation, gas prices. You're not in agreement of sending things to Ukraine anymore, like money. You don't like what's happening in the university systems. I don't know what it is, but all I know that 60%, that's a lot of people, want change in the White House. Another staggering figure in the death rate in 2020 was the highest since 1943. The number of in-house deaths ranged inside a hospital dying ranged 467,200. And you can look up that statistic in the CDC. I'm not guaranteeing its accuracy, but it's there. So 467,000 people died of in-hospital deaths in 2020. And the 2020 death rate itself is one of the highest since 1943. Now, nobody wants a loved one to die when they go to the hospital. Sometimes they go in for one thing and they end up diagnosed with other issues, and it becomes more and more complicated. During 2020, the biggest scare that everybody ever had was the ventilator. You know, people would cringe at the, first of all, that you had to go to the hospital during COVID, and second, you might end up on a ventilator. So ever since COVID, we have lost the personal touch to communication in hospitals. I know during 2020, when my father died, you couldn't go to the hospital, you couldn't visit him. Many of these people died alone by themselves in the hospital. And a lot of staff members in hospitals as well lost their skills in communicating with family members, as was not everyone, but a lot of them, because it became impersonal. I've learned one thing in this experience that's happening to me now, that family visiting the loved one that's in the hospital is paramount. It puts medical staff on notice that you're listening, you're watching, you're hearing, and you're attentive to your loved one. So, our episode today is 302. Name of our episode, of course, is Patient Advocate. It's Wellness with M&amp. M&amp is on the on-deck circle and coming out in a minute. But we need to turn to our Bibles, and we always do the Word, and we're going to look at 2 Peter, chapter 1, verse 3 in 2 Peter. And it says, "As his divine power has given to us all things that pertain to life and godliness, through the knowledge of him who called us by glory and virtue." God gives us the power to believe in life. That's important because we're talking about preserving life. And these are the subjects we're going to come up with in the outline form, so you can take out your cardboard box and your crayons, you can write them down. Number one, we're going to talk about the initial reason for going to ER, critical care and ER, next of kin, secondary effects or underlying effects, doctor death. That's going to be a good outline. We're going to talk about doctor death, team building, one contact, and creating a code. So it's time to bring out the clowns, the small bus, and you're about to hear episode 302, Wellness with M&amp, on the topic of Patient Advocate. Welcome to episode 302. We are here with M&amp, and you are listening to Patient Advocate. So without any hesitation, here she is, M&amp.
Hey everyone, it's great to be back.
She's back. No more excuses. Here we are. This is the episode that we wanted people to listen and pay attention to. Why? You never know when your loved one is going to end up in a hospital, and you never know what you might be dealing with and how you're going to navigate around it. As a result, you need to maybe have some ideas, and that's what we're trying to do here today. So I gave you the outline. I'm going to give you a little bit of the backstory. I told you about my sibling that recently went to a hospital, and I was designated as that patient advocate for that person. And I found myself from a position of relaxing on the sofa, watching the beginning of baseball season, to doing this on an everyday, making real important decisions as his health started getting worse and worse, and then got better and better. So it's a big responsibility. I did not expect this ever to happen, and it did. And you might be in that position as well. So the first thing that's on the agenda is initial reasons why you might end up in an ER, or one of your loved ones might end up in an ER, how difficult that is to navigate through that, and then they might have issues in critical care. M&amp's going to explain to us a little bit about the units in critical care, what they might be, and for you to understand, because you might not even know what these units are called or anything like that. So we'll start off with that, and then we'll work our way through our outline form and giving you some ideas. Hopefully you never have to use any of this stuff, but it's enough to give you some tools in your tool chest in case this ever happens. So, M&amp, guide us through from ER, and you might be in some type of critical care. What units would I end up in?
Well, it truly depends on the facility that your loved one's been taken to. So, you have your smaller community setting ERs that may have just a general medical ICU or a cardiac ICU in them, depending on the size of the hospital. And then you have your larger hospitals with level 1 and level 2 trauma designations. And these hospitals are usually affiliated with a college and have a large medical system. You have multiple intensive care units in them. And a lot of them are very specialized to the condition that your loved one might have. You may have, cardiothoracic ICU and neurotrauma ICU and medical ICU, and the nurses that work in each of those units and the physicians, they all specialize in specific things. Not that they're not cross-trained to take care of other patients and other diagnoses, but they are the experts in taking care of those specific medical ailments.
All right, so I'm going to translate that in English, and that means your loved one may end up in that critical situation, any unit. You have to be prepared. You heard some of the lingo. It depends on what type of hospital you're going to. Also, there's a difference in trauma 1, trauma 2, correct?
Correct. Or whether the hospital is affiliated with a medical school. Your community hospitals, you're probably going to have your attending physicians, and they're going to make most of the decisions related to your loved one's medical care. and you get into these larger university medical centers that are affiliated, or they have numerous affiliations with different medical schools and large conglomerate hospitals, and you'll have residents and interns and attending physicians. So people in all levels of learning that you're going to encounter at the bedside. You may have nursing students that are there as well, along with the nurses that are providing the care.
Now, as we navigate through the podcast, M&amp will give us this clinical review of either what the hospital unit might look like and certain other things like that. And I'm going to put it in perspective to what I am currently going through, or what I might have gone through during my father's issue. And we're balancing them both together so you get a better view of how to navigate through this. Let's start off with next of kin. In my case, my sibling said, I want him to be that person making the decisions. There was nothing written. There's no legal paperwork. And the hospital, of course, did as he wanted. Tell us the difference of if he wasn't conscious when he made that thing. Let's say he's unconscious. And how would the hospital go about picking the next of kin?
So if a patient comes in unconscious, a lot of times they have policies and procedures in place. Obviously, if there's a spouse, it's going to go to the spouse first. It does become a little bit technical if, that family is in a state of divorcing, or you're still married to somebody and you guys don't really get along or even like each other is probably the best way to say it. But initially it's going to go to the spouse, and then depending on whether there's an adult child, that's going to be the next point of contact to go to. Then it's usually living siblings, which are the eldest sibling first. And then usually hospitals, last but not least, it's the parents that they revert to. Now, it all depends on who's available, who's there, who the hospitals can get in contact with. A lot of times between the family members, they can decide and appoint someone if that family, the patient himself is unconscious and they need somebody to reach out to make medical decisions. But there's always a policy in place as to who they're going to call if need be.
Okay, so we can, now you just heard the explanation of how difficult it might be if these things are not in place prior. So some suggestions would be, if you have a loved one that is ill and there is a likelihood that they may end up in an ER, in a critical unit, sometime in the near future, get all that stuff done, written up, so everybody's of the same accord. In the case that the person is conscious and shows up and nothing has really been done, the patient themselves is going to make that decision, and the hospital, I guess, witnesses it, and they might need 2 employees or something.
You can always designate a healthcare surrogate or a healthcare proxy. There are, patient advocates, patient experience, clinicians that are in the hospital, or sometimes it's even the chaplain in the off hours that will help designate that paperwork, especially if the patient is still conscious and has the ability to make decisions on their own.
Right, so if they're awake and conscious, it makes it much easier. But if they are sedated, now it becomes a lot more complicated. But the hospital will have policy on how to do that. So one suggestion that we have somebody ill in the family, and you think you might have to end up in an emergency room in critical care, get all that stuff done prior if you can. If you can't, be of the mindset these decisions will be made for you by the hospital themselves. All right. We're also going to look at secondary effects. Now, in my instance, my sibling ends up going to the hospital via rescue. They thought it was a precautionary thing for something which they said, well, we'll just take you to the hospital for that, and they'll check you out and give you some care, and then they'll probably let you go. But as he was there at the hospital, they discovered secondary issues that were happening with him via blood tests they were doing. So secondary effects could happen. So my question to M&M, is that more common that these things happen? You go in for one thing in the ER, and all of a sudden you have 1, 2, or 3 or more other issues that start creeping up as well.
Well, it truly depends on the patient condition. If you're talking about a patient that's getting admitted to a critical care unit, the chances of them having multi-system organ failure, having multimodalities in play, having numerous health conditions that start to overlay and overlap on each other and create issues is definitely the potential. Most people that are in the ICUs these days are very sick, and the patients that are transferring out to the floors are a lot sicker than they used to be.
So secondary effects may happen. You, as that patient advocate for your family member, you have to keep in mind that the hospital is going to treat them on that whatever's more important goes first. But having that broad view of there may be more than one issue occurring while they're there, not just being blindsided by thinking, well, it's it's his this or his that or her this and her that, and then all of a sudden you figure out there's a multitude of issues that are happening here, and a lot of people don't think in that frame of mind, and then they become overwhelmed. So that brings us to the overwhelming aspect, to the subject which disturbs me the most, and that's called Dr. Death. That's what I call him. M&M's going to give you the clinical name for it.
Well, he's referring to them as Dr. Death. In a lot of facilities, it's the palliative care team. When somebody has a loved one that has been critically ill for a long time, this team is usually brought in to try to help facilitate communication. And I think this is kind of the part that's the most important. When your loved one comes into a hospital, it's communication is the key. Everything that's done should be a patient-centered focus, and that patient-centered focus includes the family. The hard part is navigating the healthcare system. Doctors and nurses all seem to speak a different language. So for the average layperson, when everybody starts talking in their medical jargon and they spew out this information so quickly, the family that's there understands just a small portion of it, and then the physician team will turn to the family members and say, do you have any questions? Right. And unfortunately, that moment, every question that you've had all day usually flies right out of your brain, and you say, nope, I don't even know what to ask. So what I encourage is for any family that's at the bedside, keep a piece of paper next to you, keep your cell phone, start creating a list of questions. Create a team around you to ask questions to. The nurse is really your best point of contact, but all nurses are different as well. You'll have nurses that have practiced for 30 years and you have nurses that practiced for 6 months. And a lot of times your nurse may change every day, every 2 days. So you'll find that nurse that you really bond with that has the ability to break down the medical condition, what to expect, what the plan of care is, where we're going, how we're going to tackle it, and that person gives you great confidence and you feel wonderful, and they really have a great way of explaining stuff to you. And then you might have a nurse that comes in after that that's very timid around families. They would prefer that they not be there. They don't know how to explain the condition in simple terms. They're more overwhelmed by the tasks that they have to perform to get through their shift. So it's a very fluid environment. It's a difficult environment, and there's a lot of resources for families, but it's very frustrating for everybody. Even recently, we've been frustrated trying to get information out of healthcare systems, and I'm a medical professional, so it's amazing that sometimes it's like pulling teeth, even when you know what you're asking for.
Now, we've had a roller coaster like no one's business. So we've been to like 3 different hospitals in 3 weeks for different family members, not the same, and all of them ER of course, one ended up in critical care. We were not ready for any of this. There was no memo. There was no, I'll be having a serious ailment later on today. We're going to need your participation in this event. We got a call, and boom, we were gone, and off we went to navigate through that system. Dr. Death now, like I like to call it, on my siblings issue. So from walking into the hospital, or even though he was on a stretcher with rescue, he ends up in a ventilator. He doesn't look that bad to me, other than he's sedated. And next thing you know, I'm talking to another doctor that's really not part of the team doctor experience. And this doctor is going to be discussing with me terms like quality of life. And what do you think your loved one would want? They'll even say things like, see that empty chair there? Imagine that they're sitting in it. What would they want? And although at least I am making a little bit of fun out of this, this is horrifying for any family member to deal with. I dealt with the same thing with my father in 2020. And, the first thing they had told me, do I approve or disapprove of him getting CPR in an emergency? So my first instinct was, no, he should have CPR. Then one of the physicians that really bonded with my father, coincidentally, they had the same date of birth. And he goes, I've got to tell you this, due to your father's condition, CPR, there's no coming back from that. And I'm not really going to get into his condition, but even if they would have saved him by doing CPR, they were really going to kill him because he was so weak from his other illnesses and so forth, and it was going to be a painful process. So in that case, I decided not to give him CPR because I understood exactly what he meant. And the way he said it, this doctor, he he said it with passion. He said it with respect. And he made perfect sense. But going back to Dr. Death, they sound like funeral directors, and they tell you things like quality of life, and they'll talk about their morphine drip. So they don't feel any pain and suffering if organs would start to fail. In the case of my sibling, I decided, no, I want CPR because I had just gone through this 3 or 4 years earlier with my father, where it wasn't logical to do it. So this time, it is logical. But this is something you have to be prepared for, the Dr. Death. It is not pleasant. Now, to say a little story, in this case with my sibling, even though I told him I wanted CPR and there's not going to be any morphine drip, he did a remarkable recovery after a while. I mean, he got off the ventilator and stuff like that. I mean, from the way they described it, the morphine drip, to how he eventually ended up 24 hours later, that was a big deal. Now, of course, you might be listening to this, your situation might be totally different. But all I'm trying to tell you is about Dr. Death. Sooner or later, if this situation would have happened to you, you're going to get that call about the quality of life. And how you'll recognize this person, they'll sound like a funeral director, not a doctor. All right, team building. M&amp touched on team building, and it's important. You're the advocate for your family member. Try to get a team around you. If not, it will be exhausting for one person. M&amp also told you to network with the nurse. The nurse is boots on the ground. They're the ones, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they're the ones have their finger on the pulse, and I'm not trying to be funny. They actually know a lot more about the patient maybe than the doctor that comes and does his rounds, maybe in the room, maybe out in the hallway for about 10 minutes. Would I be right in that assumption?
The nurse is the person that's at the bedside, and the nurse is the person whose job entails advocating for the patient. They're the ones that are going to recognize the changes in clinical condition. They should also be the ones that are educating the families on what's going on, what the plan of care is, and they're assisting with propelling the patient forward and getting better. Like it is a whole team approach. The physicians are a very important part of it, but that nurse is the one that's there all day, every day.
Now, time to translate this. Now, in my experience with my sibling, we had a couple of phenomenal nurses, gave us a lot of information, helped out a lot. They were advocating perfectly. We all worked as a team, and it worked out. Then there were others that were just there, if you could find them. Yeah, good luck with that one too. So you're going to have people that go above and beyond, and people that are just there. It's up to you to find that right patient advocate and that nurse that wants to help you, guide you, and educate you through the process. They're boots on the ground. Nurses, and M&amp can verify this. The more experience the nurse has, the more likely they are to challenge things that they don't like. If a decision came down and they think, because they're the boots on the ground, this isn't right, they don't think twice about going to the doctor and having a conversation about it, where a new nurse might shy away. Am I right or wrong on that one?
I'd have to agree. The more clinically confident a nurse is in her practice, the more outspoken they will become.
All right. So let's get down on our last two items. You're going to have to pick one point of contact if you're going to call in. Now, this is a big one. In my recent situation, I had an impersonator, somebody that would call and say they were me, and they got information. They didn't make any critical decisions, but they were getting information. Now, it wasn't awful. It was just a friend that was trying to get information, and, so they just popped in with my name, and there was no malice in it. But you want to establish one person that, let's say, calls the nurse on a daily basis. So M&M will verify this one for me. How do you feel when multiple family members call the hospital to get information on their loved ones? Now, this could go by ethnic background too. And I know you might be listening to this and giggling. Hispanics, when they have one person go to the hospital, the entire family, cousins you don't even know, will also show up and attend and hang out in the rooms and get thrown out and sneak in through the back, and they'll be there all day. So how important is it for a nurse to handle one person and give them information on a multitude of people?
It's definitely easier when the nurse has a single point of contact. We always welcome families being there. It does help patients get better faster. All the literature has proven that. It's difficult when you have numerous family members calling in, and a lot of them don't have the background information, and you don't know that the patient themselves would want the family members that are more extended to have information about them. So when a patient's admitted, that person that's going to be their advocate is going to be their healthcare proxy, their surrogate. That's the person that you want to be talking to. That's the person that's going to be making the medical decisions for you. It's ideal if that person is close and they can come to the hospital and they can speak with the medical team in person. If, they're still working a full-time job, if their family has, numerous commitments, they can't get there every day, or they live far away, they're having to travel hours, or they live across the states. You have to have a way to validate that person is who they say they are. A lot of hospitals will establish a code that they can provide to say that they can get medical information. They'll create a special word that they'll give to the nurse so that nurse can verify that the person on the other end of the phone has been authorized to receive the information about their loved one.
Now, it's a real simple process. I know we recently did it after we found out my impersonator. And what was funny is I was in the room when the impersonator called and spoke to the nurse, gave my name, and the nurse said, "That's funny because he's standing in front of me." Then the impersonator proceeded to hang up. And so we created, a code, and it works. It works for the nursing staff, and it works for the family. That one point of contact, you've got your code system. Either you can supply the code, although some hospitals will just give you the code that they might make up. But it's very important. Now, as a family member, once you get the code, you don't put that on the family chat so everybody knows. Now they can all call with the code. You have to be smart and let that one person or the close team operate with that code. And the nurse, like I said, would help you in that process as well for the code. They put it in the chart, wouldn't they? And that way it would work. All right. We've completed part 1 of Wellness with M&amp and the Patient Advocate. Part 2 is going to be more interesting because we're going to talk about the hospital patient advocate and how to navigate through that process as well. Doctors' meetings, patient advocate, and it becomes a little bit more difficult because sometimes, not all, but some professional medical people like to talk fancy in front of blue-collar people. And they give you big fancy terminology and numbers. And they know what they're doing. They know absolutely perfectly that they're trying to talk over you. I would ask you to basically tell them to give it to you in simple terms. And see if they have the ability to do it in simple terms. But we're going to touch that on the second half of the podcast. Don't miss it. It's going to be much more interesting than this because we're going to dive into the hospital world. So, M&amp, any closing remarks?
The family's the most important thing for any patient that's in the hospital, and I encourage everybody to be there for your loved ones.
Well, I'm lucky to have M&amp over here with me. As always, we're blessed to have her. Up next, episode 303, part 2 of Patient Advocate, Wellness with M&amp, coming out May 8th. As always, continue to pray for yourself because without you, we don't have anything. Continue to pray for your family, your community, the law enforcement agencies that serve you, and most importantly, continue to pray for the United States of America. I'll see you downrange.
Show 1322.